Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final concluding panel discussion of the conference. I very much look forward to this opportunity to have a multilateral chance to be in dialogue with all of you, and in particular to give everyone in the audience a chance to ask questions. Questions that maybe still remain open from before, new ideas that maybe have emerged from the discussions, and really as a forum for open discussion. The topic that we've chosen is environmental responsibility and sustainable action for climate change, the cultural dimension. Before I ask each of the panelists to say a brief, let's say 60-second response to a question I'm going to pose, I'd like to use this opportunity to formally announce something that you've seen earlier today. It's been distributed also via paper, the ICD Initiative on Environmental Responsibility and Climate Change. So I'll just read this for those of you who maybe have not yet received the handout. And I'd love to also get feedback and ideas from the panelists in the panel on this initiative as well. According to the UN Millennium Development Goals, environmental sustainability has become a priority in guaranteeing a safe future for the following generations. Climate change is significantly affecting many aspects of modern life and increasingly poverty conditions in developing countries. Therefore, immediate solutions for a sustainable planet are necessary in working towards global stability. When considering environmental issues, long-term national interests should converge towards the common goal of creating a sustainable society, and unanimously agreed upon action must be taken. To date, environmental summits such as Rio+20 and Doha Climate Change Conference have revealed how urgent it is to achieve collective action between international political actors in order to take on these challenges. Successful initiatives on the national level often involve the participation of civil society institutions, such as environmental NGOs, lobbies, and legal firms. These groups are capable of shaping cultural habits and public opinion in favor of a more sustainable approach towards a wide range of issues, leading to concrete political and legal outcomes. The ICD recognizes the vital role that civil society plays in the realm of environmental policymaking and calls for increased cooperation of these groups at the international level. Furthermore, we believe an interdisciplinary and holistic approach on the issue is necessary, as sustainable development entails different areas of actions, particularly environment, economy, and social affairs. The Institute for Cultural Diplomacy therefore has initiated the Environmental Responsibility and Climate Change Initiative in order to draw attention, explore, discuss, and promote issues concerning environmental responsibility and climate change challenges with the aim to develop proposed solutions. The initiative will focus on the importance of building and supporting dialogue between science and civil society in order to raise awareness and provide viable solutions through domestic and international policy considerations. The initiative aims are the following 4 aims. 1. To increase awareness on environmental issues such as global warming, deforestation, water scarcity, and the need for alternative renewable energies. 2. To change cultural habits towards a more sustainable lifestyle through education programs and campaigns. 3. To advocate for a decisive international governmental regulation on climate change. 4. To build a cooperation network between civil society organizations and environmental and scientific institutions in order to provide support and expertise for any action at the international level. So essentially, in other words, what we're trying to do is actually evolve, or maybe you could call it a forced evolution, of the field of cultural diplomacy. So really the transition from when governments used to just promote their own cultures and say how great French culture is or American culture, or in the sense of nation branding, as we discussed this week, in terms of saying the USA is like this, Germany is like that, to really change cultural diplomacy so that it actually is dealing with real world issues such as climate change. So we don't get Germans and Turks together to talk about Germany and Turkey. We get Germans and Turks together to talk about climate change, to come up with solutions, to actually create proposals that will really have an effect, whether it's a micro level, one of a project we heard today, regarding one particular city in Bogota, for example, or a national or international initiative. That's the basic idea. The second thing that we're trying to do here is really somehow correct, I guess, the problem that I've observed in civil society around the world, not only when it comes to the environment, but also civil society as a whole. It tends to be very fragmented. You've got many organizations doing a lot of really good things, and nobody's talking to each other. There's maybe a great idea in Bogota that somebody in Berlin has never heard of, and actually there could be a knowledge sharing. There could be maybe things in Berlin that we could do to support something in Bogota, etc. So that's the second approach. Basically, the more we know about each other, the more we actually work together, the overall efficiency is increased. You can avoid duplication. You can see also where different NGOs and organizations can also assist in other ways. So that's the basic idea behind this. And I really hope that we can actually continue working together. I mean, part of our intention in inviting all of you here was actually that we do get to know each other and that hopefully we will actually work together afterwards. So that's kind of our hidden agenda in terms of inviting you here, not just to have some good speeches, which we did, and thank you for that, but really to actually get to work. And for me, that's when cultural diplomacy starts to get interesting. Yes, it's good if we understand each other. It's necessary that we trust each other, but we really urgently need to work together, and we can't really wait anymore. So that's, for me, one of my main driving forces at ICD, to really push the necessity for good cultural diplomacy so that we can actually get to work. Cultural diplomacy is only part of it for me. If we just do cultural diplomacy, we failed. If we do cultural diplomacy and we succeed, then we can actually start to work together. Then we can be more optimistic. So what I'd like to do with this panel is really just maybe ask one initial question, just because we've heard from all of you already, but to kind of get this discussion going. So I'll say, let's try to limit it maybe 60-second responses. And then we can immediately give it to the audience to see what are the questions you actually want to talk about, what are the issues that are important to you, and also maybe what ideas do you have. This could also be a context for us to discuss leadership initiatives. This was brought up earlier in the week. Now, leadership initiatives are the ICD's sort of strategy for working together with participants and alumni. So instead of us telling you what to do, go write a paper, or here's your homework, we ask you and we invite you to tell us what you'd like to do. Maybe you already have an initiative and you need support. Maybe you have an idea, but you're looking for a partner. This would also be a good forum for those kinds of discussions and proposals as well. Chances are maybe there's somebody in this room who actually can help you or actually can offer you at least advice. So those are, I guess, again, some ideas for things I'd love to see in this discussion. So I'd like to begin just with a simple question as we look at the title for the panel, Environmental Responsibility and Sustainable Action. My first question is, what is the responsibility of civil society? In the sense, it's easy to point fingers and say, this government's not doing that, or this company is not doing that, or this company is doing that. But what responsibility does civil society have when it comes to climate change? Secondly, if you look at the title, the cultural dimension. Is this all actually maybe as simple as culture? In the sense, by changing our lifestyles, by changing actually the way in which we live, might that even be enough to actually solve the problem? Is it as complicated as actually regulation, this and that? Or what about this cultural dimension? Is there more to that than maybe has been given weight earlier today? So what I'd like to do is maybe let's start on my left, and we can go from left to right. A 60-second response to what is the responsibility for civil society, and how much weight do you give to the cultural dimension of this?
All right. The civil society, of course, plays a huge role. And I think that the main role that they have to play is to complement the official or the popular areas of sustainability, such as climate change, or such as transport, or such as fossil fuel usage. And to be honest, I think that civil society is failing in one aspect, in a very important aspect, and that is the consumption of animal protein, which plays, according to the FAO, plays a huge role in the emissions of carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxides. Yet, there are very few environmental organizations who are touching the subject. If someone is touching it, it's an animal rights organization. And that is really, I know, and that we come in there with a cultural dimension, because that's culture, is our lifestyle. And we cannot afford to just not discuss it, because the population is growing, the population is getting wealthier. With more money, you will buy more meat, which is more carbon dioxide extensive. So I think that civil society and environmental organizations have a really large part in playing there.
Thank you. Yeah, 60 seconds.
Go for it, yeah.
Okay. Well, as I told earlier, complex approach is needed if we want to see real changes. Because of the inner logic of the system itself, it's going to be a bit contradictory, will not change itself, but the system are we, including the civil society. And because economy and politics are very tied to the system itself, it is the civil society who can really do the change or motivate the change through pushing governments and economy. And as for the cultural dimension, this kind of mainstream economy or logic are pretty much into our basic values. I mean, I'm not going to be a better man if I have an iPad, but this is what comes from the television and from everywhere, and this is motivating this economy, and local. As for the cultural dimension, still we need to recover our old basic values and the others' basic values throughout the world for the peace.
Thank you very much.
Well, civil societies should certainly listen and do what I think the public wants, because that's not what's happening. They're doing what they want to do, and they're obviously they are more influenced by business than by the people who want certain things. So that has to be changed, and maybe it's the society, the other society, who have to move them and make them feel responsible. And as for cultural diplomacy, of course, it's very, very important. And I think if we probably go back to the values of many countries and peoples, their values are very similar, but are we really realizing how similar our values are to put them all together instead of this division of being one country? We're all human beings. Aren't our values the same? And maybe cultural diplomacy can really bring this out and make it much more realizable and to work to it.
I'd like to suggest a model for you to look at, and our friend from South Africa will be very much aware of it. It's the Parks Foundation in South Africa. And they've been developing trans-border parks between countries, and some of those countries have been countries in conflict. And their most recent project embraces about 5 or 6 different countries: Zambia, Botswana. You probably can rattle them off. And what they do is they bring in science, and they scientifically look at the entire ecosystem of that area. And they do studies and so on, and all of this is done in partnership between all the countries. And then there's co-management of the park. So taking that model, and if you take perhaps a pilot ecosystem and see what countries it embraces, and bring the scientific community, the governments, civil society, NGOs, bring them together in a series of roundtables, forums, and whatever, and start addressing that area in terms of its holistic needs, using the climate change as the initiator. But then what other environmental issues, social issues, how can you embrace all of them in a holistic solution, and do it in a beginning collaborative way, and then with the ending up with particularly climate change and ecosystems in co-management.
Well, we listened this night, today, a lot of very small but also good news about peripheral activities that are in direction of saving this world, but also a lot of huge bad news. Let's just think about army, weapons, war, how much it costs to humanity in terms of lives, of course, but also in terms of economics. And I don't think that global warming is the worst of the problems. It is a very sad reality, but the real problem is the human mentality. Somebody said once that our planet has a cancer, and the name of this cancer is humanity. This is true, but I think that this cancer could be healed, but not starting from the governments. I don't think that we will be healed starting from the top. Could be healed, probably, maybe, starting from the periphery, starting from every one of us, starting from these small, apparently small projects we heard here today. They are small, but I've seen also a picture of many small fishes that became a big fish and eat the other fish. This is the way we must work. Small things, but all together against the danger of this cancer. Thank you.
So I think the responsibilities of civil society are twofold, and they're mutually interdependent. One of that being that civil society has to educate and raise awareness among the public, right? Because generally there's a large-scale ignorance of a lot of the critical issues that we face, at least particularly in the United States and I'm sure elsewhere. So we have to make sure that the people are aware and so that they can make these decisions and pressure their politicians to make the choices they want to see. The other side of that is pressuring the politicians from the top down to follow through and make those decisions that their constituents are asking for. And neither one of those are going to be successful on their own. We really have to be pushing from the bottom up and the top down for that to be successful, I think. The cultural dimension is particularly interesting because it's so difficult. Because of our different backgrounds and the different sort of socially constructed realities that we have ingrained in us, that's really hard to change. I think the most practical sort of framework that we have to do that is trying to change using policy incentives and frameworks is to use and change our patterns of consumption and production. And that's probably the most realistic way we have, at least in the short and long term, of shifting these policies and the way we behave to benefit the planet.
To add value to that, I think the first dimension that we all need to realize is change needs to come within ourselves first before we actually expect other things to change. And I think that the major thing that we can all do is not only educate ourselves, but educate others so that change is ingrained within the hearts and minds of others. In addition, I think that the cultural aspect of ingraining sustainability into each one of our cultures is a reality. It is completely possible.
One more chair.
And I think that the overall goal should be for us to harness and nurture our creativity. I think that each one of us is extremely creative, has incredible passions, has incredible abilities to make a change. And what we really need to be doing is focusing on the nurturing of each one of our passions and working together in order to collectively make that change. And so, yeah.
Well said, Chris. Civilization, at least since the end of the Ice Age, has been a work in progress with all of the challenges and pitfalls and advances and progress that we've made. No one has the answer to how to solve all these problems in their back pocket necessarily. I think fundamentally what civil society or humanity has to understand, and I always, pose this question to people. Do they know? How many people here know what a year is? How many? Raise your hands if you know what a year is. Who knows what a year is? What's a year? A year. What's a year? What is it? That's just time. It's time. It's just days. But what is it? What does it represent? Anybody know? Exactly. And I think civil society or civilization or humanity must understand that that is the one and only trip that we all make together. And as soon as we realize that and take that into full account, I think we'll make some progress.
Thank you. I'd like to let's go back to the left. What we're doing right now is we just ask the simple question, what role is there for civil society, or what do you expect for civil society? What responsibility does civil society have when it comes to climate change? And secondly, how much weight would you give to the cultural dimension? Is it as easy as just changing, as you were saying, Chris, our own lifestyles? I mean, can it be that simple?
Well, I think we have seen in the world that actually our lifestyles and our culture is shaped by people who are influential in culture. And at the moment, I don't think that the sustainability issue is being pushed through strongly enough. We have some, celebrity-type people who speak about an issue here, an issue there. You have, Angelina Jolie working with refugees, the different things like that. But I haven't seen a real concerted focus on this climate change issue and to really push forward the sustainable by leading by example. And I think that's one step that needs to be taken, and then civil society can lock onto that and keep the continuity and keep the momentum towards transitioning to a sustainable future. And I really liked your thoughts, about the revolution around the sun. Another interesting thing I think is, interestingly, people who have actually gone to space and seen the Earth as one little ball, hanging in the sky. If you look at the statements they have made, they've all spoken about, if every human being just had this one opportunity to see the Earth as a little marble, we'd have no wars, we'd have no, conflicts, no racism, none of these issues, which are actually quite superficial, because from space you don't see boundaries, you don't see countries, and it's just one Earth, one homogeneous planet, and which we all share, and we only have one. So.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now open it up to your questions and your comments. Really, how do you feel about this issue regarding the role of civil society and the cultural aspect? I mean, if the Egyptians can get together and actually prove to be stronger than the Egyptian army and actually overthrow their country, what power do we have? And is it maybe more power than we think as individual citizens? Is it a matter of the little fish coming together and becoming the big fish? I'd be very curious to hear your comments, your feedback, and your questions for all of the panelists. Feel free to direct the questions also to specific speakers if you want to get specific thoughts. So maybe Umama, if you could take the wireless microphone, and as always, if you can raise your hands, we can let the discussion begin. Okay.
What I think the role of civil society regarding the issue of climate change and sustainability is actually vital, because we've seen that the role of multilateral organization or international law is actually failing, and we have to face that. The UN doesn't come to any agreement, and the ICC or whatever is not binding because the major states are not complying with the regulation. And I think the only way to actually influence the decision of politicians and businessmen is if this desire for action comes from the bottom, and that's the only way. We faced so many failures with the Rio 20 and the Doha, and nothing has changed. So now I really think it's time for civil society to take action, and I believe the first step should be through a change in cultural habit, and which means a change in the education system, or an improvement in the education system.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Thank you very much for your interesting panel. I just want to add a few things that I didn't hear in the panel. One of them is media. I didn't hear anyone talking about the role of media in boosting the raising of awareness. Also, the other thing is you asked about the role of culture in developing or boosting also the awareness of people toward environmental responsibility. I guess culture play a really very crucial role, especially that it has to do with individuals, not institutions. So every one of us carry with them part of culture, and if that culture is failing or is not does not fit within the context of environment, politics, and everything, then also that would reflect negatively on the world where we live in. The other thing is as I said, media. I think as politicians, as civil society, and as a private sector, we could mobilize media to also raise awareness, not only of the threat facing the environment, but also those who are posing the threat or causing this threat. And among them is the great powers, because our friend said that it's true we are sharing this world, but unfortunately we are not sharing it equally, and we are not sharing it in a very fair way, because it doesn't make any sense that the great power, they go to underdeveloped countries such as Africa, they took its resources, they take it back home, they consume it. Sorry.
There's actually a glass of water right there. I don't think anyone's touched. If you want, it's from the last speaker. I don't think you
But
drink
it
it.
doesn't make any sense. They go to Africa, they take the natural resources, they take it back home, they industrialize it, they consume it, and then they take back the waste to Africa. Like, for example, no one has talked about, for example, a nuclear waste. And like, for example, in Morocco, we receive like the waste of the US. Doesn't make any sense. We have to stop being selfish, you know? Selfish in terms not only of like how we carry ourselves, but also like how we perceive the other and how we want to share Earth with the other. I would like your opinion about this point, and thank you.
Thank you, Badra. Any responses? Here.
I understand what you're saying about the media, but you know the media is very controlled from other places. So also it's the people should also organize the media or not listen to them, but tell them how that they should report. And what you're saying about the garbage in Morocco, you say garbage from the United States. The United States has been putting their garbage in Haiti. They've been trying to sell it to other countries all around the Caribbean. But who knew that? Who knows that? Nobody complained about that because nobody knew about it. So you're right, but the trouble is ignorance. No, and I think that's the greatest trouble we're dealing with, because how many people really read newspapers, and would they get incited? You know, instead of people and all that, will they really move if someone asked them to march or be careful with how they live? This is another way of looking at it.
You know, and to add value to that, the situation is also pretty complex when it comes to the waste issue, because you'd be pretty shocked to know that a lot of these countries who are taking waste from not only the U.S. but other, you know, Australia and others, they're taking it willingly because they're actually making money off of it. In fact, you know, these countries are you know, basically taking this waste but also getting paid for it. And so there's that huge divide and an issue, obviously a challenge that needs to be addressed, but it is completely, you know, run economically. And back to the media as well, I mean, you know, our media outlets, especially in the United States, are completely run by the corporations that, you know, are causing a lot of these problems. And so for them to ingrain commercials and educational programs throughout our TVs in order for us to be more educated, it's going to take some type of revolutionary shift, I think, in the mindset of the people.
Hello? Yeah. I think the revolutionary shift is actually already happening with internet communications. We see that actually a lot of people in the West are spending less time watching their TVs and actually connecting to alternative sources of information through, you know, YouTube, blogs, you know, social networking. And some of these platforms have actually had a huge impact. We saw what happened with in the Arab Spring. You know, it's really leading to, you have films like Kony, you know, 2012, which has gone, you know, worldwide. So I think all of these is just the birth of these kinds of movements. And you mentioned something about culture. You know, I think an issue is that a lot of people are subscribing to Western culture, which is very materialistic in nature. And there needs to be a shift, you know, of values, because our whole system, our whole world system at the moment is based on who makes the most money, the most profit. And there was an interesting study actually done that the higher a country's GDP, the more destructive it is on the planet and on the environment. And there's also alternative movements like the World Happiness Index, I think it was.
Gross national happiness.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of movements, a lot of initiatives which are just, you know, starting, gaining influence, and through these new platforms, I think if we become engaged, we can make the difference, you know, and not just, oh, I'm powerless, you know, I can't do anything, the media is controlled, the big corporations are controlling us. We have to take the initiative, and if we do, we can change anything. And we saw. I was quite surprised, you know, with the wars which took place in Iraq. There were demonstrations, but if there was a huge demonstration, I don't think Western societies would be able to carry out this action. Because after all, in the West, they're democratic. We have the right to actually protest, to go out and stand up if there's something which we fundamentally disagree with, something which not everyone in the world enjoys.
You know, I'm a proponent of demonstrating. I'm a proponent of demonstrating because I'm in the anti-war movement. And in fact, 2 days before I went to the United States Army, I was at an anti-war demonstration. This was back in 1966. And I do value the significance of demonstrations. You know, no one can underplay that. The protests. I have a friend of mine. He's also in the anti-war movement. If we talk about democratic rights, and he talks about America, he says the only right you have in America is the right to obey. So, what he meant is that in conjunction with what you said about what the governments do, what their intentions are, and what the intentions of the general public is. Now, if you would imagine that if people would go out in the streets en masse in the millions and the zillions and protest, that would hold sway, in the halls of power. That is not necessarily the case because the truth was hijacked in this war, in the Iraq war, in terms of the weapons of mass destruction, and they have hijacked the truth a number of times. And the way that happens, and not to belabor the point, but the press is in the hands, as was indicated here, of special interest groups. When I was a kid, I used to think that you read the newspaper and you were getting some accurate journalism. Today we see that it's colored by many different perspectives, and that indeed people have lied to us. So we have to break through that, and we have to, under our own initiative, break through that. But that is a daunting task, and one that's going to take a lot of perseverance and a lot of commitment.
Just one thing about demonstrations. Oh, well, whichever.
We've got two stereo.
Stereo. But about demonstrations in London before the Iraq War, there were 1 million people. Mr. Blair didn't even listen. And Mr. Chirac listened because he knows the French, if they demonstrate, they start throwing paving stones and they get what they want. And I think the French are much better than the British, although I'm British.
Thank you. Maybe other perspectives or comments also from you, the participants. Okay.
Hello. I love the caption, one earth, one family, and I think I share in your passion for the good work you're doing. I think I want to go back to Africa because I have a passion for Africa, and the figures you're giving, 80% growth, population growth in Africa is tremendous, and I'm concerned. So when institutions, international organizations give reasons of social insecurity and poor governance in states in Africa as reasons for not functioning very well, I don't know what would be the submission of this noble panel on that.
I didn't understand.
Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
I'm asking that international organizations and various institutions trying to work among the civil society in Africa give reasons for poor performance as sometimes poor as a result of poor governance or social insecurity. So if this persists, if these two factors persist, what else can these organizations do to help Africa, please?
Yeah, part of the issue, like China buying land in Africa, the politicians benefit, and so that is part of the issue. In some instances now, donor agencies are making their donations directly to NGOs to support the NGOs directly. So that's part of the solution, I think. But the NGOs coming together, doing their part and trying to set their agenda and perhaps working separately from government, creating your own plans, moving forward with your activities, and then perhaps in time the governments will get behind you. It's a very difficult question, and I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but try to get a consortium of NGOs working together and pooling your resources and pooling your impact and reaching civil society. That might be the way to do it.
Yeah, I'll add another comment here real quick. And as I mentioned earlier today, a lot of our work recently has been in Africa. It's been expanding there very, very rapidly. And I'm not sure I know enough about the culture yet personally to have a definitive answer here, but one of the things that I've noticed with the work we've done so far is that my friends there that I work with are probably the hardest working people I've ever encountered. And they have a really serious capacity to mobilize people within their communities that I think really kind of outweighs the capacity that we even have like at home in the United States. I gave the example earlier, our very first chapter that came about in Uganda, their first event attracted over 700 people. And we were absolutely blown away by this. I mean, we've never had anything in the US that big yet. And so I think that there is a really tremendous capacity in Africa for people to be able to mobilize civil society and mobilize their communities and their villages to be able to put that pressure on the government. Whether or not the government is in a position to really respond to that, I don't know enough to say, but I think that there's a very big capacity that they can really use to their advantage there.
Well, there's one example that comes to mind, and it's Trees for Zambia. And it's all young people. And they've recruited hundreds to each year go to Zambia for a few months, and they're planting trees in the area of Victoria Falls, which has lost a good part of its forest, and has been very, very effective. So it's mobilizing other youth, as our friend here said, and taking action on your own. There's even one person in Zambia who alone, on his own personal journey over about 15 years, has planted about 5,000 trees.
You'll bear with my sitting down. I have a long knee injury. When it's cold, it comes back. Yesterday, there was a round table like this on unemployment of the youth and so on. Today is the last one on the issues of civil movement. I will expect the panel to comment. My conclusion yesterday of the round table reminded me, I read a lot of stories, special novels, such that I don't know the title of this book. But I remember the question that was asked by ICD yesterday around youth opportunities was once asked in one of the novels, who moved my cheese? Who moved my cheese? Those who read stories, novels, will understand the essence of that question. Now, today, is civil society and cultural dimension. My summary is still simply, this is about interest. Okay? It's about interest. Maybe you'll understand me when I say, Shell in Niger Delta in Nigeria this year was sanctioned to assess the damage they do or they've done there. They costed it, that it cost them 2 billion rands to rehabilitate the environment there for over 30 years. Okay? And bemoaning about it and doing it soon as possible. Yet, Shell, in 30 days, they make over $15 million US. You are talking about interest. Whose interests come first? Thank you.
I was going to say
Oh, you were going to say something.
I think that we're discussing Africa, and as we all know, the average age in many countries is like 16, and there are thousands of young people educated and no jobs. But there's also a lot of corruption. You drive somewhere in most countries, the policeman stops you because you're white, and if you don't have the money in the papers, he makes a terrible time for you. But this is from the top down of the. How do we change that? How do we change that with the young people, that corruption is not acceptable and these things that they want should be done? And this is perhaps where it's the young people who are going to change Africa. That's why they need the communication that they now have. Many of them can communicate and learn these things, and we need in our action for civil society to give them the strength and the courage to do this and know there are people behind them. I think that's how you make the change.
Okay, any other final questions or comments? The microphone? Okay.
In Zimbabwe, NGOs in Zimbabwe are facing a huge natural death because they are perceived as political conduits. In South Africa, there is also that perception. In most of the sub-Saharan countries, NGOs are seen as conduits of the Western regime changes. How are you going to work on this perception in Sub-Sahara? I've heard Chairman Mark talking about fragmentation. There is no longer an issue of fragmentation. It's also the issue of perception. If you see an NGO, the dollar is coming. And they are using these NGOs to fund oppositions. Somehow, that's why I said the issues of interest are at play here. Fundamentally, we have to go to the basic establishment of NGOs. Thank you.
It's a good point. Maybe if I could just give a brief response, then I'll give it back to my colleagues. Civil society, you make a very good point. It can mean very different things in different contexts. I think I'll give 3 examples. In the United States, I think traditionally civil society was born because of deficiencies in the American government. What I mean by that is you pay very little taxes in the USA, although the government actually does relatively little for you compared to Germany, for example, where healthcare, retirement, etc., unemployment benefits. I mean, Germany does a lot more. Therefore, civil society in the US, I would argue, began really when private citizens came together with the intention of helping other citizens, saying, look, we can wait a long time for the government to build a homeless shelter down the street, or we can do it ourselves. And so I think that's really the spirit of a lot of civil society, at least in the purest sense in the USA. If you go to Turkey, for example, we did a conference there about 6 years ago in Istanbul. For a long time in Turkey, it was similar to what you were saying. It was very difficult to actually start an NGO because there was a distrust from the side of the government. The idea of citizens coming together, forming groups, that was kind of worrisome to the government at the time. So it was very difficult. You had to go to the police station, background checks, all kinds of things to start an NGO. That's changing now, especially in the European process, but that was one issue. In many sub-Saharan Africa countries, also in many countries in the former eastern part of Europe, there traditionally was also really a disconnect. If you were part of civil society, that implied you were against the government, and it was really one or the other, and the idea of civil society working with governments is impossible in some countries. A final example would be Japan, where they realized in the 70s they actually didn't have a civil society, but actually wanted it. So it was actually a governmental initiative initially, top-down, to actually start a civil society in Japan. So just to underline the point, it can mean very different things in different settings, of course. But I think that's also one of the things we're trying to do at ICD. Work with what we've got. There are some countries, like China, for example, where it's a very different situation, trying to find NGOs, access them, etc., where it's a very controlled environment. There are other countries where it's much easier. So just to underline that, it's a very important point you make. We can't just assume that civil society means the same thing in different settings. But I'm not sure who was first. Did you want to respond, or?
Yeah, I'll make a quick point here. If I sort of understand what you're getting at correctly, is this perception of NGOs, particularly from the West, coming in and working in different cultural contexts. We absolutely have to have a sensitivity to that. And I think one of the ways that we've sort of been approaching that now that we're very sort of new to this international work with ideas as an NGO is we never ever try to tell them what to do. In terms of, look, you have to do this type of project or you have to focus on this, right? It's finding out what are the local issues that they're facing and figuring out what they want to do, right? So we have these toolkits, like I mentioned before, where we have all these different initiatives and we say, look, these are some of the things that we've done before and have worked for us. Do any of them interest you? And if they don't, what's something that you want to do and what can I do for you to make that project successful? So then I can use my knowledge and the knowledge of my resources and my friends in the organization to help you do that by yourself and to help your organization do that by yourself. And that's at least one way in a sort of sensitive context how we can approach that carefully and I think successfully.
I think we must realize that many people are jaded against the NGOs. You know, in Nairobi, the whole of the UN community live in this wonderful compound, and right beside is a massive slum. You know, how can you do that? These people are hardened to what they're actually supposed to be working with. And often they're in that way because if they really opened their heart, they'd lose their job. So they're in a very difficult position. There are countries where they literally hate to see the white Land Rover Jeep come out because they don't believe in it. How do we change that? And for Zimbabwe, there is one incredible NGO called ZANE that are working and helping the white and the black people, and admirably, but they're not with any ease, that's for sure, because they need it. But I think we live in Geneva, we know what the attitude is, and often you think, are these people really working for their conscience? Can they look in the mirror? I asked this question once actually to the head of what was it, the World Trade Organization and the UNEP and a couple of others, and I said, can you look in the mirror, can the panel look in the mirror every morning and say they are really working for sustainable development? I'm sorry, but you should have heard the answers. They were so disappointing.
I have a point to make, which is you have many branch organizations of the United Nations. One of them is UNDP, whose mandate is development in countries. And in any one particular country, their operational budget, if you exclude the salaries and technical and these kinds of things, it's a couple million maybe. What is this amount in comparison to a multinational company coming in from China, from the West, BP, Shell, and offering the government a deal for 2 billion, 3 billion? You know, and how much can you do with a couple million? And there's no way they can fulfill their mandate, no matter how much these people try. And the thing with NGOs is that often in many countries, because the UN is very expensive to bring in international staff, they actually mandate local NGOs to actually carry out certain actions, certain operations, which can be more effective. You're also employing, encouraging local people. And there's a certain, how would you say it, accountability there, a certain responsibility, a certain standard which you have to keep up, right? There's you have certain principles which you can't violate. And there's also many other NGOs which aren't affiliated with the UN, which aren't working in joint programs with the UN, which do very good work. But I see your point, that there's also some which get funded by interests which aren't necessarily doing, what is in the interest of the country. So, but it's tricky. And if we want to change, we in the West, we have to actually push our countries to support these kinds of initiatives. And I do believe in the UN system. There's a lot of problems with it, but it's the best we have, and I think without it we'd be much worse off.
I think that what you said about perceptions is very accurate and very pertinent to this discussion. I remember for the first time I heard the word NGO, I didn't know what it meant. What do you mean by NGO? And well, obviously it means an acronym for non-governmental aid organization, And if we look at things historically, and if we look at the underdeveloped world or the exploited world, then we see that, for instance, you had the Peace Corps, you had AID, and these organizations would, have CIA agents in it, and people doing different things to influence the politics of particular countries. Historically seen. And so there's a built-in distrust, unfortunately, for the very honest and sincere efforts that are being made. But it is not without reason. Before the coining of the term NGO, you had groups going to Africa. I know we had people coming from Detroit going to Africa doing different things. People from Black people or African American communities going there, and also people who were white or whatever color they were. It didn't matter, But it was a question of how they represented themselves and from whence they came. So this distrust to me is legitimate, because given the history of Africa, given colonialism and neo-colonialism, then where does it begin and where does it end? And in whose interest, as you pose the question, are these efforts made? Now, if somebody comes into a country with an NGO and they're waving a flag that happens to have been the symbol of oppression, we got a problem. So we have to deal with all of those questions. I think is a very legitimate point.
No, thank you very much, Darnell. We're actually out of time, so I think what we should do is to try to conclude. Unless was there another comment or question? I don't want to cut it, but we're a little bit out of time. If there is anyone else who would like to add something, of course, that would be fine. But if not, I would suggest we can sort of conclude the formal part of this, and then hopefully many of you will join us also at the Greek restaurant. Hopefully all the speakers as well, where we can continue the discussion in an informal way. But maybe just to wrap it up, I want to just maybe go back to where we started. In the sense, I think the last 5 days, we've done a lot. The Berlin International Economics Congress was looking at, I guess you could say, three main things. So intercultural relations, youth development and advancement, and environmental responsibility and ecotourism. And I think today was really the day where we reached the climax and actually brought it all together. As I look at these three things and I look at the issue, let's say, of climate change or environmental responsibility, the opportunity that I see for these three things to converge is what I mentioned in the opening statements for the panel. I think there, for youth development, for advancement, let's work together with initiatives dealing with what I would consider the most burning priority, environmental responsibility. When it comes to intercultural relations, again, you can accomplish the same thing. As I said, don't bring Germans and Turks together to just talk about Germany and Turkey, but bring them together to actually deal with real world issues such as environmental responsibility. So for me, even though it may have seemed strange to you initially that the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy was organizing a conference called the Berlin International Economics Congress, and it may have seemed strange to you that we're focusing on these topics, youth development, advancement, ecotourism, etc., I think it's all very related. And I really hope that the future of cultural diplomacy will move in this direction. And that's part of our goals and part of our agenda in this conference, really to keep pushing the definition. So it's, get the selfishness out, in the sense it's not about promoting our interests or our country, but actually the opposite, really, bringing down those interests, and sometimes in a very humble way, even putting them totally aside for the interests actually of the global community in which we live in. So for me, I think it was really a great journey that we went on with all of you this week. We got to know many different cultures through the different embassy presentations, as well as some really valuable insights, especially today, in terms of the challenges and also the opportunities that are facing us. So I'd like to maybe ask everyone to please join me in thanking all of the panelists here, who we worked very hard today up until now 7 o'clock in the evening, and we really are grateful for everything that you did. And now I'd like to ask the speakers to maybe give an applause for all of the participants who stuck with us through 5 days, morning until night. It would not have been a conference were it not for you. So an applause for the participants. And then last but not least, of course, the ICD staff and the interns were working tirelessly, not only these 5 days, but also the weeks before and the months before. So maybe a big round of applause for all of the ICD staff, and in particular the interns and the volunteers. We work with interns and volunteers who are doing this for nothing. Some of them have fellowships here and there, but basically, unpaid basis, they're here full time, giving us everything. A lot of the work is actually not very glorious work, on the phone, sending emails, etc. So a special thanks also to the interns and the volunteers, who really also encourage and inspire, and I think really express everything we're talking about there too in terms of youth development. This is actually what we're doing every day. So.